What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Wednesday, August 18th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 10-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Charlie Morton pitching against a low-salary batting team, the Miami Marlins. So Charlie Morton is only giving up a .679 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 6 righties here tonight. But the reason I like this pick is because the Marlins have only hit 9 of his last 40 pitches. That's a .225 batting average. He's $9,200 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 28.5 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 3.49. His record is 11-4 on the season, pitching an average of 87 pitches per game, averaging 33 fantasy points per game. He scored 43, 43, and 34 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game. 7.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Charlie Morton here versus the Miami Marlins. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Will Smith with a 31% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, JT Brubaker. Will Smith is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .999 OPS versus righties. And JT Brubaker, he's giving up a .722 OPS versus righties. Now, Will Smith is 0 for 2 versus Brubaker, but the splits are good, and he's $3,500 FanDuel salary, $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 35, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Will Smith here versus JT Brubaker. Now I also like Ji-Man Choi. So here's a value play for you. Ji-Man Choi has a 75% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Ji-Man Choi is batting 36% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .812 OPS versus righties. And Spencer Watkins, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 39% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .164 OPS versus switch hitters. Ji-Man Choi is 1 for 2 with a .167 OPS versus Watkins. He's only $2,500 FanDuel salary. He's $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 15, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ji-Man Choi here versus Spencer Watkins. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Ty France with a 52% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Mike Foltz. Ty France is batting 17% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .875 OPS versus righties. And Mike Foltz, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 35% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .658 OPS versus righties. Now Ty France is 4 for 14, batting a .286 batting average and a .769 OPS versus Foltz. He's 3,000 FanDuel salary, and he's 1,000 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 0, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ty France here versus Mike Foltzy.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
I also like David Fletcher with a 58% batting advantage over Tarek Skubal. David Fletcher is batting 24% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .891 OPS versus lefties. And Tarek Skubal, he pitches 34% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .831 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Skubal yet, and David Fletcher is $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 4 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like David Fletcher here versus Tarek Skubal. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Harrison batting against Lance Lynn. Josh Harrison is batting a .751 OPS versus righties, and Lance Lynn is giving up a .646 OPS versus righties. But the reason I like this pick is because Josh Harrison is 10 for 31, batting a .323 batting average and a .995 OPS versus Lynn. He has 2 home runs and 3 doubles in there. He's $3,000 FanDuel salary, only $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 9, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Josh Harrison here versus Lance Lynn. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. One of my favorite plays on the slate tonight. I like Xander Bogaerts with a 19% batting advantage over Andrew Heaney. Xander Bogaerts is batting 11% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .946 OPS versus lefties. And Andrew Heaney, he pitches 8% worse to righties as he does lefties. He pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .795 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Xander Bogaerts is 7 for 13, batting a .538 batting average and a 1.461 OPS versus Heaney. He's $3,900 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 13, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Xander Bogaerts here versus Andrew Heaney. I also like Corey Seager with a 13% batting advantage over that low-salary pitcher, JT Brubaker. Corey Seager is batting 14% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .910 OPS versus righties, and JT Brubaker is giving up a .718 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Brubaker yet, and Corey Seager is $3,200 FanDuel salary, $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 15.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 21, 0, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Corey Seager here versus JT Brubaker. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Nick Ahmed with a 60% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Ranger Suarez. Nick Ahmed is batting 25% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .818 OPS versus lefties. And Ranger Suarez, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 34% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .999 OPS versus righties. Now, Nick Ahmed is 0 for 1 versus Suarez, but he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 13.3 fantasy points here tonight, he's averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 12, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Nick Ahmed here versus Ranger Suarez. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like JD Martinez batting against Andrew Heaney. JD Martinez is batting a .749 OPS versus lefties. And Andrew Heaney, we know he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .795 OPS versus righties. Now, JD Martinez is 3 for 6 with a 2.227 OPS versus Heaney because 2 of those 3 hits were for home runs. He's $4,000 FanDuel salary, $800 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 29, and 32 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game, so I like JD Martinez here versus Andrew Heaney. I also like Michael Brantley with a 58% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Brady Singer. Michael Brantley bats 32% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .942 OPS versus righties. And Brady Singer, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .931 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Singer yet, and Michael Brantley is $3,200 FanDuel salary, $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 7, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Brady Singer. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Justin Upton with a 50% batting advantage over Tarik Skubal. Justin Upton bats 15% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .792 OPS versus lefties. And Tarik Skubal, he's pitching 34% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .831 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Skubal yet, but Justin Upton is only $2,600 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. So I love that price on both sites, projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Justin Upton here versus Tarik Skubal.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.